Welcome to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges. Insights from SoCal's trusted attorneys.
Hello and welcome to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges. Insights from SoCal's trusted attorney, Amanda Hill. With a focus on family law, Amanda offers helpful, caring, and professional legal services and advice. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is The Hidden Challenges of Divorce with an MIA Military Spouse. Amanda, thanks so much for being here. It's great to see you again.
Hi, Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with this. When a military spouse goes MIA during divorce proceedings, what are the first steps you take to determine if their absence is due to legitimate military reasons or if they're intentionally avoiding the proceedings?
Yeah, so first I ask a series of detailed questions for the client, essentially gauging whether they can locate them and what contact information they have available for them. And if all of those resources come up with nothing, then there is a public website where you can look up and confirm somebody is in fact active duty. And of course, they're not going to tell you where they're located, but they would at least confirm, yes, this person is considered an active duty military member. And then based off of that, then we would try to reach out to the ombudsman, who is usually assigned, depending on which branch it is, there's usually at least one assigned, to try to see if we can get in contact with either the ombudsman, which would reach out to the military members command. And if that still comes up with nothing, then we have to look at legal options.
Okay. And what challenges do you face in determining whether a military spouse who is MIA is actually missing or simply unreachable for other reasons?
I would say the biggest challenge is gauging, number one, whether it has anything to do with the actual underlying breakdown in the relationship between the parties, my client and the other person, or whether it is in fact something to where maybe because of their military duties, they're overseas and maybe they don't have service because they're on a ship, for example, they're in the Navy, they're on a ship. There's limited service there, or they're in a combat zone, so they only get service every so often. So we kind of have to, what's important from a legal perspective is gauging as much detail as possible that the spouse knows about their situation and what training they're doing and where they're at. And if they don't know much about it because, maybe they didn't have that line of communication open, then we need to go into digging and figuring out if we can track down, like I mentioned before, their command or anything in relation to, their actual military duties.
Is the military helpful in confirming a spouse's status as MIA? Do they communicate this well with the civilian spouse?
Usually, if you represent to them and they understand that it's a family member and their current active spouse that's trying to reach them, then it's interesting because they have their own military laws. And one of them is they can't just leave their spouses high and dry, right? Just the same as, for example, they have military laws against adultery, right? And you can't cheat on your spouse or you can get penalized and get in trouble with your command and go through a disciplinary proceeding if you are in fact proven to have committed adultery. And that includes while you're still separated. So you have to have a judgment of divorce first, right? So there are procedures in place where you can't just, they have a set of procedures where when you sign up for the military, you're saying that if I get married or if you are married at that time and you have children, for sure, especially if you have children, they will try to help you as much as possible. I will say, based on my experience, the Navy is usually a little bit more helpful than, let's say, the Marines. But I do think sometimes the reason behind that is a lot of times the Marines are in combat zones or in more situations where they may actually be overseas because of an international conflict that's happening, versus in the Navy, a lot of times it's just an issue of figuring out which ship they're on and figuring out if it's in fact an issue of not having internet or cell service.
Okay. Yeah, I would imagine when the kids get involved, it gets even more, a complicated situation gets even more complicated here in what we're talking about. What happens to the custody arrangements when one parent is MIA? How does the court ensure that the child's best interests are still considered?
Well, of course, whoever has current custody of the child, if they're petitioning the court to remain to have that custody, they're very likely going to get that granted because there needs to be some stability for those children, while the other spouse, is either purposefully kind of gone missing in the legal action or if it in fact is due to their military duties. but the SCRA can provide some protections for them if it in fact is a result of their military duties. But what's interesting is, let's say they are going on a long-term deployment in a combat zone that they are going to have limited capability of communication, then a lot of times what is required before they can leave is a family plan is put into place. And that is required whether they are still a family unit and everything is fine, or whether they're going through something where they are two separate parents navigating a custody issue. So they have to have something in place to where if for some reason they're not available due to their military duties, there is a custodial arrangement in writing that the command signs off and says, okay, you figured it out. Show me proof before I allow you to go and do whatever your duty is, whether it's overseas or somewhere else.
Okay. And you mentioned the SCRA. What is the process of filing a motion under the SCRA to establish whether the MIA spouse is protected from the divorce proceedings?
Yeah, so the process is not too complicated, but it is a two-step process. So the first step is filing a motion with the court with a declaration attached under penalty of perjury, explaining to the court all the efforts you made to try to locate that military member and try to get in contact with them. And then at the hearing, the judge will then determine whether it's appropriate for an SCRA attorney to be assigned to the case. That SCRA attorney is a court-appointed attorney that does that work for free on a limited scope basis, just to reach out to the command and confirm whether in fact it's their military duties that's precluding them from participating in the legal process, or if they are available. And usually they get a stern talking to by their command that if in fact they are available and they're just trying to avoid the legal process, that they need to get in contact with us as soon as possible to avoid, because they never want to deal with civilian stuff. Their command's job is not to babysit them. Their command's job is to make sure they're completing their military duties. So they usually get a stern talking to, and pretty quickly thereafter, we get some better lines of communications open. That's been my experience. But what I mean by it's a two-step process is the first step is to have the court say it is appropriate for an SCRA attorney to be assigned. And then an SCRA attorney is assigned by the judge or the judicial officer. And then at that point, the court clerk will reach out to that attorney that's assigned by the court and have them say, hey, this is the person that we need you to reach out to. You've now been appointed the SCRA attorney. And then there's a future date set to confirm and check in back in with the judge and the SCRA attorney is, okay, have you been able to make contact with this military member? And if so, is their military duties limiting their ability to participate in this process? Or can they participate and I can go ahead and sign off and say, the SCRA doesn't apply here, the protections don't apply because they are able to participate in this process.
Does that happen a lot where they're just kind of ducking you guys?
I would say in my experience, it's been very few and far between that we've actually even had to follow through.
Yeah.
A lot of times what happens is even when we file the motion, once they're served and we let them know, hey, like your command's going to get contacted, they usually will get in contact with us. If it in fact is a reason where they're just kind of trying to ignore the process.
Yeah, they're just trying to kick the can down the road, if you will. If a military spouse is MIA and no clear communication is received, how does the court protect the interests of the civilian spouse when it comes to asset division?
I don't know if it's necessarily protecting them per se, but there is automatic restraining orders that go into place once a action is open, like let's say it's a divorce action. And those protections allow for no changes in life insurance beneficiaries, no changes in beneficiaries of bank accounts, large chunks of money can't be moved around. So that automatically goes into place whether it's a military case or not. But in addition, if the SCRA is triggered, and let's say the case has to be stayed because their military duties are precluding them from being able to participate in the process, then there's no orders of division of assets. Everything is essentially frozen in time until they can come back and participate in the process.
I'm assuming that there's some pretty significant delays that can happen if a spouse has MIA status. How do you navigate those cases? It's got to be pretty tricky.
Usually we try to see, because of today's day and age, we have internet, we have email, we have virtual meetings that you can do. It's pretty few and far between. And I think with like post-COVID era, we've seen that dramatically decrease, at least in my experience, where things usually don't get paused unless it's a custody issue that's come up and they don't see eye to eye on how custody long-term should be established. Then in that case, there is sometimes some stay of the orders, but there'll be temporary orders that are made. It's not like everybody's in limbo forever. Usually what'll happen actually is the judge has a discretion to expedite those types of cases, and somebody can come in on an ex parte basis, which is like an emergency hearing, and say, hey, I got this other person on the other side that's going to be leaving soon. Can you hear my hearing before the normal due course date that would be set in several months down the line because they're leaving on X date? And 9 times out of 10, the court's going to grant that request and then make temporary orders before the other person leaves.
Okay. If a civilian spouse suspects that their military spouse is intentionally evading the divorce proceedings by claiming MIA status, where should they start? What legal steps should they take?
The first step would be to go deep diving down social media to see if they're posting anything that would give you reason to believe of where they're located or whether they are in fact still stateside. Because a lot of people don't think, and they'll post stuff that they're at the, or they'll check in to a restaurant or they'll review something or they'll post if they're at a party. And usually you can kind of put those pieces together. So checking social media, reaching out to family and friends that they have mutual connection with, and going through all their contact information that they have. I always recommend to try to do that first before getting in contact with the command, because the quickest way to, I want to say, piss off or anger a military member is to contact their command, because you're going right straight above to their boss and saying, hey, they're not doing it. They're not doing something right. And, we all know military, it's very strict. They can get in trouble for, hey, why is this person contacting me and saying you're not getting in contact with them? So if it's necessary, it's necessary. But sometimes if your goal is to try to resolve it and not litigate everything, then, trying other sources of getting in contact with them is usually, best strategy.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to just cause any more angst or issues between you and your spouse at the time. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you explain what happens to the division of military benefits like pensions or survivor benefits when a spouse is MIA and the divorce becomes delayed?
Yeah, sure. It's pretty simple. Nothing really will happen. Everything will be stayed until there's a court order dividing those assets. And if they're already retired, then you're not going to be dealing with somebody who's truly MIA. Although I will say I have had experience where somebody will retire and then they'll move out of the state or out of the states and they move to out of country. But the good thing about that is you can still contact DFAS. And if you need to locate them, as long as they've been served the original petition and they're now no longer active duty, you can actually default them and proceed with the default process, as long as you can prove they're not active duty. And as long as they were served the original paperwork, if you proceed by default and you get a court order dividing the assets, then you can get what's called a domestic relation order, a military domestic relation order that divides them, for example, the pension, and then it gets sent off to DFAS. And if it requires the military members or ex-military members' signature, then, and they're still not communicating, they're still not cooperating, there's another process, legal process, that's a little bit more lengthy. But the option is essentially asking the clerk to sign on that person's behalf, because you can prove to the judge, it's called assigning an Elizer, that they're just purposely not, providing their signature on the documents. And if you can prove all your efforts you've made to try to get them to cooperate with the process, then you can have the clerk of the court execute it. It is a highly technical process, but that option is available.
Wow. That's wild. Yeah. I can imagine that's a pretty technical process. That's probably a last resort kind of thing, obviously, that the court wants to do. They don't want to do that if they don't have to, obviously, right?
Right, of course.
Okay. And is there any other thing that they try before that, or is that just if they can't find them, they can make a case, then it's just the clerk, they'll do it.
Right. And as long as you can show, again, that you've done all the due diligence to try to locate this military member or ex-military member, retired member, I should say, and they're just not cooperating and they're avoiding you because they want to receive the full benefit and they don't want you to start accessing whatever you're entitled to per the judgment of divorce, then, and the court finds that it's appropriate and reasonable and to not continue to have you not receive the benefits that you're entitled to, then the court will grant it. But yeah, it is definitely highly technical, and you have to present a declaration that's very detailed of all the efforts you made to try to locate them. Usually though, DFAS, again, which is Department of Finance and Accounting Services, that handles all the military members' pay, but also retirement pay. If you get them if you get in contact with them, or even the VA, because sometimes they'll convert it to partially VA benefits, partially pension. It's very complicated, as you can tell. There's all these different parameters and caveats, but if you can get in contact with the right person, they usually can be pretty helpful in reaching out to them and saying, hey, my understanding is there's a court order that needs to be enforced.
Yeah, divorce proceedings are complicated enough. This just adds a whole other layer to it.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges, insights from SoCal's trusted attorney, Amanda Hill. To connect with Amanda's firm, visit kandhlawgroup.com. And please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Amanda, it's always great to chat with you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.